Hello, welcome to Pardon My Vlog. It's Friday. It's that time of the week again. I'm talking to you. Let's do this. I tried desperately to think of a witty response to Dan's holiday vlog last week, which is an excellent vlog you should check out. And I couldn't think of anything funny I could do in time. So, given that there was nothing in the news that really captured my imagination recently, well, there was that thing about the Superhenge, but we don't talk about that. Well, we do, but I'm saving that for another archaeology special. So, what am I going to do this week? I thought I'd read you some of my writing. What I'm going to read you is what I consider my main piece of work at the minute. I've been working on it for a really long time. I think it's nearly 5 years at this point, which is no excuse for the tiny fucking amount of work I've done on it. But it's sort of, I've written a lot of stuff in the world. That's not actually gone into the novel yet. It's bigger than my pen and all that. So I'm going to read you the first chapter and maybe a little bit more, depending on time. So let's dig in. Chapter 1. The Handash Teller weaves words, not with truth, as the weaver weaves wool, but with a true falseness, or a false trueness that can change the world. An old Hannish proverb. It is through the non-truth of tales that I found the truth of the world, not through power or devotions that other people have before me. But in the old tales and new lies have I learnt what is and what may be. I am a storyteller, a historian, a bard and a poet. I am the collected legends, histories and stories of a dozen cultures. I am Kendra. Let me tell you a tale, my own. I was born in the year 1427, by the current reckoning, in the town of Erwold on the coast of the Iron Sea. My birth wasn't marked by famine or flood, lightning or the moon rising the colour of blood, as was common in the legends I grew up with. I was simply the youngest child of a prosperous fisherman and his wife. My mother was a stout, fierce woman, but then again she had to be, with 8 children nipping at her heels. She was sometimes thought to be some sort of witch or cunning woman, by the more gossip-prone members of the town, because of her luck with her children, losing only one in all her years, and her eclectic knowledge of herbs and poultices. Though the tongues wagged, she was one of the 3 people called whenever there was someone badly sick, herself, the priest, and the town doctor, which was perhaps something of a shame, because those 3 could not stand one another. Father, he was a solemn man. He always reminded me of a great oak, tall and proud, but always supporting the ground around him. He and my 6 brothers ran 2 fishing boats, and would often be gone for weeks at a time. For the best harvests were ever pushed further and further out into the Iron Sea. When he was home, the house filled with such love as to be fit to bursting. How he doted on me and my sister. He always called me his little elf. Hearing it even now takes me straight back to the 2 of us sitting by the fire, him telling me stories of old ways, giant kings and princesses from under the sea. So those early days of my girlhood were spent waiting for my father and brothers to come home, getting under my mother and sister's feet and causing as much mischief as I could. This did not last as long as I expected, however. For in my 8th year I was apprenticed to the old Witter. It was the festival of Fishin, a day of feasting, dancing, and the telling of tales about the fish tribes who rule under the Iron Sea. Our normally grey little town was decked out in all its myriad finery. Garlands of summer's last flowers were strung about every door. Emerald green banners of the Lord of the Fish Folk hung along every street, along with the banner of a king to remain seemly. A troupe of musicians played in the town square on a great dais. A market bustled throughout the day, and the streets were alive with rumours of fireworks, conjurers, and other dark delights. I, like any sensible girl, was making the absolute most of it, running through the streets with the other children, howling with laughter. Our mud-stained feet sounded like the hammering of rain as we ran through the twisting alleys and streets. A few errant dogs chasing us, barking for the sheer joy of flight. We ran riot, scattering chickens, upturning apple carts, making as much mischief as we could. No small task for a gaggle of 9 or 10 small children. We choked the narrow streets just so we could glimpse a puppeteer or street performer. I remember one of the boys managed to steal one of the juggler's pins. Just ran up and grabbed it out of the air. Then we were all racing away from his angry shouts. It was because of this we ran into the harbour. Oh, what a sight it was! All the ships were in, 60 or more, all flying their colours, fluttering in the light ocean breeze. It was there we were caught. Ulfhild Garrick, wife of the town selectman. She was normally a kind enough woman, but today she had a scowl that could boil the sea. "What are you children doing here?" she cried shrilly. "You should have all been at the choosing half an hour ago. Hurry, hurry!" And with that she marched us to the Guildhall. The town Guildhall stood triple duty as selectman office, headquarters of all the local guilds, and private tavern for the town's guild members. So the place was a strange mix of formal authority and relaxed camaraderie. All I knew was I wasn't allowed in. The choosing was a simple event that happened every year. All the tradesfolk in need of apprentices would come pick from the eligible children from Airwold and its surrounding villages. The children would gather into the Guildhall, examined and haggled over. It was not uncommon for a father to overlook his own son for a more advantageous prospect, or for families to have apprenticing agreements going back over many generations. So it was into the Guildhall we gathered. The carefully carved blue-grey stone caught and reflected the smoky light, causing monstrous shadows to leap along the walls. It was an old building, dark and stooped, forever smelling of burnt pine, wood ash and sour ale. We were gathered in what normally was the common room, benches and tables pushed to the edge of the room. The room was lit by lantern light pooled around us. After a few minutes, Selectman Garrick came in among us, and divided those of age, and those so close for it not to matter, from those too young or already apprenticed, moving them off to the side with a hushed warning to be quiet and behave. He was a man who perpetually looked like he'd lost too much weight too fast. Folds of loose skin swathed his face, permanently etched into tight lines of worry, but for all that he was a quiet, sober soul. Then he came to the front of the room and began explaining how the choosing would take place. We'd all heard it before, either from sitting to the side on previous years, or being drilled on what to do by our parents. He cleared his throat, and his slow, methodical voice rang out across the hall. "As you all know, the choosing is an important time in a young person's life. It will set you on the course of your life, so please take it seriously. In a moment, the various good men and women will come in and ask those of you they think have potential questions to judge your suitability. Answer truthfully, because you get but one first impression. It's better to be thought an honest fool than an ignorant liar." With that, my father, who was acting as proctor, led in the would-be masters, most of whom I recognised by sight, local farmers or fishermen. 12 had come to find apprentices, and there were only 8 of us, so it could easily be seen that it would be a hotly contested year. Once he'd let them in, my father leaned against the wall behind Selectman Garrick. He gave me a little wink as he settled into place. I patiently stood. I was passed over by most of the tradespeople. Being a girl made me of little interest to the carpenters and farriers, though a grizzled blacksmith grilled me for a few minutes on my knowledge of metals and patterns. After him came a red priestess who belonged to a nunnery. She asked me many questions on my understanding of the divine, which I answered the best I could, and she seemed pleased with my responses. Finally, after speaking to every other prospect apprentice in the room, the old witter came to speak to me. He stood in front of me and looked me up and down. His face was so lined and creased that it looked to be collapsing in on itself. The greying scrag that framed his face could only be called hair in the loosest terms. To me it looked like the branches of an ash tree were growing out the top of his head. I cannot begin to explain how much I miss that face. "I would like you to lie to me," he said softly in his deep, sonorous voice that completely mismatched his worn face. I was taken aback for a moment at his request, but with the alacrity of a child, I readied my best half-truth, distortion of misinformation, and flat-out whopping great lie. "No, I cannot lie. My father would beat me for it. Though I must say, your hair looks lovely today," I stated primly. With this, his face split into a broad grin and he began to laugh, a great throbbing chuckle like the beating of a huge drum. Once his laughter had subsided, he began to ask me what stories I knew, and which were my favourites. Now this was far more my kind of question than the various aspects of the divine, or the best sorts of housekeeping. So I told him what I knew of the tales of the giant kings who lived in the land beyond the sun, the love and war among the old gods, and the tales of saints and prophets. Old tales of the green folk who stalk the woods, silly tales of animal lords, and of my favourite tale, the story of the High King of the Sea, even reciting a few verses that I loved. While I rattled off this list, the witter still had his broad smile plastered across his face. It was through that smile that I came to love him. It was not long after this that we were set free to roam once more. The meat of the matter was done. I waited outside. I needed time to think over the past hour, and more than that I needed my father to explain it all to me. Why would any of them take me to apprentice? I'm just a silly girl who got the story of the Sea Lord stuck in her head. It circled in my head while I waited. I sat down on a salt crate opposite the Guildhall, munching on an apple I'd stolen from the apple cart we knocked over. Later, it must have been an hour, but it felt like endless days to me perched on the salt crate. The assembled men and women left the Guildhall. Some of them shot me strange, furtive glances. I saw my grandfather, a priest of the blue, leaving, but he took no notice of me. Near the back of the crowd came my father and the witter. They were talking to one another. Something father must have set the witter off, because he began laughing hard enough to scatter the gulls. They would never tell me what passed between them then. Once the witter gained control of himself, they strolled up to me. "Kendra, Witter Gilder has chosen to apprentice you," said my father, with an oddly triumphant tone. I found this quite strange, as I hadn't expected this at all. I only went to the choosing because I was forced. I had always expected, as much as I'd thought about my future at all, that I'd be apprenticed to my mother, just like my sister. My confusion must have shown in my face, because the witter spoke up. "If you want to be apprenticed to me," in a very kindly way, all I could say was, "Why?" Now it was the witter and my father's turn to look confused. Then the witter's face broke into his finest grin. "Because you can do it. The question is, do you want to do it? Don't answer now. Come to my performance tonight and tell me your decision in the morning." Then he bowed theatrically to me, nodded to my father, and strode off into the evening sunlight. I reached for father's hand, and we wandered off to find the rest of our family. And that's chapter 1 of Kendra's story. Hope you like that. See you next week.